So Patrick and I have actually known each other since 2003.
Yeah.
When we sat in an executive seminar together for 6 days. Mm-hmm. And I watched Patrick in this seminar, as we got to know each other, pick and choose what he needed from the readings we were doing, whether it was Aristotle, you all know this, Milt Friedman, just picking the things he needed for this Ashesi, this university he was dreaming about. And at that point, I think, you were certainly still in trailers when I came to visit. So I promised Patrick that I had never been to Africa before, and I promised him the first time I went to Africa, it would be to Ghana, which I did.
Yeah.
And you were in trailers. But tell us a little bit. And we spent 2 weeks together. It was, I think, 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful. Tell us a little bit about how this came about. You left Ghana. Mm-hmm. You went to Swarthmore. You worked for Microsoft. You made quite a lot of money there at Microsoft. But I remember you telling me that you told them then at Microsoft you were going to make the money you needed to go back and do this vision you had for Africa. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so while I was at Microsoft, the genocide in Rwanda happened, and the vice president of my unit started a grassroots effort to raise money to support people in Rwanda. And there was also a crisis in Somalia. And I contributed to that. But then my son was born. And, I was about 30 years old, and I have this infant child, and seeing in him the future generations of Africans. And considering that, all the bad news out of Africa was not good for people of African descent, wherever they lived. And so I started to think about going back to Ghana to help with development in some way. And basically settled on education and higher education in particular, because I did this exercise with friends and family in Ghana and came to the conclusion that most of our problems, the root cause why those problems were not being solved was because the people in charge had accepted the status quo, and some of the people in charge were corrupt and were actually part of the problem. And my aha moment was my adopted brother he said to me, Patrick, those of you who've gone to the US for your education, when you come back, you sort of think differently and you're asking questions differently. And those of us who stayed, we don't do what you're doing. Like, you're trying to solve a problem that has nothing to do with engineering, which is what you're trained in. Right. And so I thought, maybe it's something about the education I had in the US, the liberal arts model, teaching critical thinking and problem solving. I went to a college where students could be trusted to do take-home exams and not cheat, right? And so I decided, what I should do is try and bring that model to Ghana. And got permission from my wife first. And she said immediately yes, and then I stalled. I balked for 1.5 years, actually, after Rebecca said yes. But eventually went to my manager and said, I decided to leave to go do this thing. And I'm going to go to business school and learn how to do it first. So that's where that came from.
That's where you did, okay. And so at that point, you knew this what you wanted to do.
I knew this is what I wanted to do.
Okay. And so you went back to Accra and you began.
Yeah, so I went to business school to learn how everything works. Right. I was just doing engineering. And then went to Ghana to do a feasibility study and developed sort of the business model for it and the operational model for the university. I built a board of trustees in the US. I got an advisory board with faculty from 3 universities here. And we really started to do the work of putting together all that we needed to set this university up in Ghana.
And technology was really important.
Yes.
Because you didn't have a library, but you had, your students could access the internet quite easily, I think,
Correct.
if I remember.
That's right.
So you had this school going, and when I met you, I think 60 students?
Yeah,
Maybe a little more.
It was maybe about 90 students or so at the time.
And so everything was going well until it wasn't.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the crisis you went through, turning on the lights.
So early days, actually from the very early days, like literally after the first semester of Ashesi, and then after the first year, our students were off doing internships. And Ashesi was suddenly being noticed in Ghana because our students really, truly were thinking and acting differently. So the academic part of our enterprise was doing very well, but the fundraising part of our enterprise was not doing so well. And you remember, I think it was here I mentioned to you that I'd had a stressful year because cash was very tight. And you had said, well, Patrick, if you ever get to a point where you can't keep the lights on, give me a call.
Right.
And I cashed that chip. I had 2 weeks of cash.
Right.
By the time I called Margot. And she asked me how much I needed, and I told her, and you gave me, I think, a month or two of cash, and we completely reset. But what happened was some of my board members chipped in. I went to Seattle to meet with my mentor there, and I told him, I said, Paul, I'm in trouble. We're almost out of money. Students are doing really well. They've put their lives in my hands, and I'm afraid we're going to fail. My board is scared. I'm scared. And I don't know what to do. And I think my board is going to ask me to close, and if they do, I'll fire them and restart. And he said, what do you mean you're going to fire your board? You can't do that. And I said, well, what I mean is if they decide that we should shut down, I will say, okay, that's fine, we can. But then I'll immediately restart and recruit another board and keep going. And the reason I had got to that point was I had, as part of thinking about the possibility of shutting down, I had traveled to other universities in Ghana to figure out how we might transfer our students to other classrooms.
Right, I remember that.
So we said this was going to be our graceful shutdown. And I'd come to the conclusion that there was no graceful shutdown. The classrooms that I was sitting in were just teaching by rote and all of this stuff. And so he told me to check in with my board, why they were worried, to really focus on major gifts fundraising and not trying to do a big, broad-based. He asked me to get some sleep,
Right.
which was the most important advice, I think. And he asked me to talk with my team. So I did. And I told my team we were in danger of getting into financial distress. It was a bit of a lie. We were in financial distress.
Right.
But I also said to them that as a captain of the ship, I'd be the last one off. And asked them all to contribute towards figuring out how we're more efficient, how we keep costs down, get tuition revenues up, and all of that. And then literally within months, everything had changed. So that was a real crisis, but there's some key lessons that I learned from that. One was part of the reason people were scared was because I was scared, and I was showing it. So when I calmed down and started to breathe, I sent some emails to my board from a martial arts book that I read that said, when heaven is about to bless you with an important office, it first makes you struggle and suffer. And in doing so, you build the capabilities for the office that you're about to take on. And so we should see the struggle as that. It's building us up. And so so that was sort of a way of organizing my thoughts. I learned that, in my conversation with my team, when you ask people to act heroically, they do.
Yes.
And I also learned the importance of building financial buffers. And so we started to build financial buffers. So after that, every year, we would save money, invest. And by the way, those buffers helped us through a number of other crises, right? So we had Ebola outbreak in West Africa. We had COVID.
Right.
And now we had USAID canceling some grant agreements. But because we had been building those buffers, we've been able to weather those kinds of storms. And I have a highly motivated team because we went through that struggle together.
And you talked, just keep going on this, we called it a resiliency fund, you called it buffer
Correct.
fund, and I think you told me, it doesn't matter how much it is, but have that fund so you can weather some of these crises when they come up.
That's correct. So we set up two funds. One was a capital replacement fund, and one was a critical needs fund. Now, the capital replacement fund is, if a donor gives us money for lab equipment and so on, that lab equipment has a useful life. It will eventually need to be replaced.
Right.
We shouldn't have to go back to the donor for that. And so we sort of put money away so that when we have equipment that USAID donated to us years ago, that is still current because we had been doing that. And then the critical needs fund is taking unrestricted funds from our donors, some of our unrestricted funds, and putting it away into a critical need fund. So that's for money that's there for the bad luck events when they do occur.
Which they always do.
Which they do.
Right.
And so between these two funds, and when we're having this conversation, it feels like you're fundraising, you don't have enough money. And I said, well, but even poor people can save a little, right? And certainly we can save a little, and so we should sort of build that discipline now. And when you start to build that discipline, you see that actually this works, and then you have the market's also working for you because you've invested and you're getting returns on that.
Nice. So let's switch a little bit to, as Anne said, you got the McNulty Prize in 2009, I think,
Right.
second recipient. Talk a little bit about what the Aspen community has meant to you, both being a fellow and then this community of McNulty winners, but also how you've used what we do at the Aspen Institute that you're part of and everyone here is part of, that you took to your students, and the values-based leadership that you've put in place at Ashesi that makes you very different from probably any other university, certainly in Africa.
Right, so there are a couple of things that I took from Aspen and also from the McNulty Prize. So the first is the readings that we were doing, that sort of Socratic conversation.
Which everyone in this room, I think, has
with leaders.
Yeah.
And it exposes you to great ideas, but it also exposes you to, when you think about some of the leaders that we read about, they've done deep work on themselves. They've often done work on trying to change systems. Some of them have actually challenged humanity. They've challenged, norms about how human societies were thinking, like MLK and others. Yeah. And, I took a lot of inspiration from that because the project I'm involved in, like if you look at Ashesi's mission statement or vision statement, we don't talk about a vision of building a great university. We talk about transforming a continent by educating the leaders who will make decisions in the best interests of society, right? So our vision is about, a systemic societal change. And reading about leaders who've actually done that and how they did that was really very inspiring, and who've gone through hardships far beyond what I was going through, right?
But you put your students through this.
Correct. And we put our students through that. So we actually have a leadership seminar series at Ashesi that all our students do. And we did it because of the power of what I saw here, but also because I was seeing some problems about how students were making decisions about how they choose student government leaders and so on. And I think because of that leadership seminar series, a number of things have emerged out of Ashesi. I think that it was in 2006 or 2007, a woman at Ashesi became president of student government in Ghana with a 75% vote. And it was the first time in Ghana's history as an independent nation that this had happened.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, a few years later, this has sort of become a norm in Ghana that women do rise to the positions of running student government. And I credit the seminars that we were running with that. I think the seminars helped us when students were having the conversation about whether to have an honor code or not, and what they could do. And so it's been hugely helpful to us in this way.
And does the honor code, do all your students sign on to the honor code?
So the honor code, just because of the history of how it started, has evolved into something where every freshman class goes through a set of debates and then decides whether to sign on to the honor system or not. And if they have a 2/3 majority saying yes, then they're on the honor system, which means we stop proctoring their exams, and they promise to hold themselves individually and corporately accountable to good behavior. So what this has meant is every year, the conversation about whether we want to have this honor system is active on campus. It's been running for 15 years. There actually have been 2 classes that didn't sign on to the honor system. One class didn't vote at all. One class had 2/3 of the members voted, and 92% of those 2/3 said yes. So they did not meet the 2/3 criteria. They asked for a revote, and the university said, nope, you got one chance. You should have taken this conversation seriously. And I don't think it was a question of antipathy, but it was a question of apathy. But apathy is also, it counts, right? And we wanted them to learn that lesson. I think if they had redone the vote, they would have said yes, but it was a good lesson for everybody. And then the McNulty Prize, I think, helped us in a number of ways. One was just an incredible validator. The team was incredibly proud, and they felt a sense of accomplishment that we would be elevated in this way. But it also helped us, I think, with dealing with, you know, government authorities and so on. You know, like these things sort of build your stature,
Right.
so that certain arguments that we were having and pressures that we're facing sort of decline every time we get an international recognition of this kind. So yeah, Aspen has been huge
Really
for
important
us.
to
It's been very
this.
important for Ashesi.
So what's next? I mean, talk a little bit about Ashesi, because you've added a lot of graduate programs, master's programs. Talk a little bit about your plans.
Right, so, you know, the central thing that we're doing is leadership, and preparing leadership of a certain kind for the continent of Africa. Moving forward, we're now executing our 3rd 10-year plan, where we sort of, in framing that plan, we ask the question, what do we think the world will look like 30 years forward? And what do we need to be doing today to be useful and relevant in that world 30 years forward? And a number of things emerge. When you look that far out, it's the big things that you see. You see the population growth that's happening in Africa. You see the AI revolution. You see climate change. You see the Continental Free Trade Agreement in Africa. And we were doing this exercise during the COVID crisis. And so health is also a big thing. And so we've sort of mapped out a set of things that we're going to do. And we're leaning into engineering. We've started, we've got accreditation for a bioengineering program. We've started mechatronic engineering, both undergrad and graduate.
Amazing.
We're doing a lot more work in AI. So 2/3 of computer science capstone projects now at Ashesi involve the use of AI and machine learning. And we're building master's degrees in engineering, in computer science with a focus on AI and cybersecurity, and also an MBA program. And then we've also started an executive education program. So, Margot, we started with undergrads, and now we're doing graduate students. We're doing executives who are already in sort of C-suite positions or equivalent in the private sector and public sector. And we've started the work to design a PhD program at Ashesi. So we've decided that we're going to become an R2 university by the Carnegie classifications.
Which means what?
Which means that you're doing a certain level of research. You're producing at least 20 PhD students a year. And so, we have this entrepreneurship ecosystem at Ashesi. We have an incubator that is, there's lots of businesses coming through that. There's an open track, there's a health track, agriculture track, and energy, solar energy track. But we want to sort of boost that by doing research as well, to help with the ideation of solving problems. And also because it's very difficult to recruit Africans who have left the continent for their doctoral degrees.
You want to keep them home.
So we've decided that we're going to sort of grab the bull by the horns and start to produce PhDs on the continent. Other universities are doing it, but we're going to put our shoulders to the wheel as well. So that's what we're up to.
And a think tank in Washington, CSIS, did a demographic study, and they predicted by 2050 that Africa will have tripled in population.
Right.
Whereas other countries, China will have halved in population, this sort of thing. So you're looking to that in what you're putting out.
Yes, we're looking to that. So now Africa's population of 1.3 billion or so is going to be about 2.5 billion. And what we've taken from that is the notion that we need to scale to the size of the problem. And when you think about scaling to the size of the problem, it is not a scale that any one institution can do. You have to take a systems approach. And so we set up a collaborative and invited other universities to join together. And so now what we're trying to do is get other universities to more actively adopt, so the pedagogy that we're doing, the commitment to ethics in the curriculum, the commitment to career placement for students as a fundamental thing that we all should do. And it turns out that some of those universities that have joined the collaborative are doing decent research, so we're learning from them as well as we're getting into that. And it's been really wonderful because over the last 7 years, about 320,000 students on the continent have seen things change in the universities in terms of curricula, in terms of course syllabi that they're using, in terms of career services that they have. And we meet every year, and it's just really fantastic to see the deans and presidents and faculty of universities move from a mindset of we're in competition with each other to being more collaborative and helping each other to be stronger, because it's critically important that we build a strong higher ed ecosystem on the continent. Otherwise, the billion extra people coming are going to be more of a problem than a blessing for the continent. And so this is also something that we're very engaged in.
Congratulations on that.
Well, I forgot one thing. We've studied majors in econ, law, and public policy. I'm trying to...
In the collaborative or at Ashesi?
At Ashesi.
Ah, okay.
Because I'm trying to educate politicians.
So Patrick, and I'm glad you brought that up. So when when I was in Ghana with Patrick, and I saw his vision and what he wanted to do, and particularly his views on corruption. And I said, you know, to really make good on this vision, you're going to have to become a politician.
Right.
And Patrick told me he couldn't do that because he'd promised Rebecca, his wife, that he would never do that. And we just talked about this, whether you could make better use of your vision out there as a politician or what you're doing. And so talk about that, because I think you've come down on educating political leaders is maybe where you were going.
So actually, it wasn't just my wife. My mother also didn't want to go in politics.
Okay.
But that was one of the reasons. There was a second reason, which is that Ghana's democracy is still a young one. And it is not super mature. It's getting there. But if I were to get into politics, Ashesi University would become a target of whoever my political opponents are.
Didn't think of that.
So even the work that I'm doing, which I think is super important, would be at risk. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, I think that there's an issue with critical mass, right? So if I were to go into politics, or me and a few people were to go into politics, and we were trying to do something, but everyone around us was doing the opposite, to me, it's like putting a drop of water next to a furnace. It just evaporate. I wouldn't be able to move it. So I need a bucket of water before I engage that furnace, right? And so we need to build an army. We actually need to educate more people and get more people in this mindset before we get there. And I think that our engagement with other universities on the continent is also very important, because it's also about trying to build this critical mass. And once you have a critical mass, you engage, then things get, can move more quickly, right? So 3 reasons. It's not just Rebecca.
Right, okay. No, and so we've run out of time, but congratulations. And I'm glad you stuck with what you're doing and didn't become a politician.
Thank you. Thanks, Margot.
Thank you.